All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. Now, remember, I don't know what episode it is. I just continue to record, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. Now, remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so you continue to have this thing grow, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. Now, I've got another special guest with me today. I've got Coach Nick Calhoun. Coach, thank you and welcome to the Coach's Compass today.
No, thank you for having me on, man. I've been following you on Instagram for a while and seeing all the cool people we've had on here, so I'm pretty honored to be on this call.
No, I appreciate you guys. Like, all of you coaches are a lot better coaches than I have been or will be probably ever in my life. But I think it's cool to bring you guys on and talk about how you got to where you got to. So my first question for you is, Coach, when did you realize that coaching was more than just a job and it was your calling?
So I come from a basketball family. A lot of my siblings are really involved with the sport. One of my siblings does coach basketball in college. So I didn't really know if I wanted to go through what he went through with that, but I also love the aspect of working out. I love the aspect of development, building confidence, going through those challenges, maybe from something that's external, such as the weight room, for example. Big eye opener for me probably for that was when I first got to college and I started interning. And even though I specialize in basketball, I love the sport. I got to intern in college and just see how development can affect not just basketball players, but an array of athletes.
What has been kind of, because you talk about being in the basketball world for a good amount of time, right? And what has been some of the biggest changes you've seen across the board with a lot of these athletes coming in and going out in the new age of athletes nowadays?
So I would say, and I'm not that old, I'm 30, but I will say biggest changes I've probably seen is outside of the external things associated with the sport is these guys are extremely specialized. So you don't see as many, say, football kids coming in playing college basketball, or you don't see many kids that did, other sports such as soccer or baseball. It's mostly strictly basketball. And I work in Division 1 where I'm getting a lot of kids that are very underfed, overworked. So training wise, we kind of, slow cook them if we can and progress the ones that, have kind of earned it, but also need to be progressed.
Do you think the specialization though in, these early ages of just like one specific sport is doing well for, all sports? Because if we look at across the board, like, baseball's doing it, soccer's doing it, basketball's doing it. I mean, even nowadays, football's doing it. To where they're just one sport year round. Like, you got 7-on-7. I'll speak about football because I know that the best of my abilities, right? So you got 7-on-7, then you got spring football, then you got summer workouts, all these camps and all that stuff. Then you got your regular season, and then you start it all over again. Like, is this
Oh, it's
really what the
crazy.
athletes need?
And it's in sports becoming like a rich kids thing too. It's crazy because we all say we played outside, we would go play, with our friends, we would do this sport. Now it's like everything has a cost to it. Everything involves travel. I do think you're starting to see a lot more skill. I will say in some ways it's good, some ways it's bad because they become very drill dominant, I would say. And even in their movement patterns, you see where, a kid's out there and he's just, strictly a skilled guy that shoots the ball really well, but he might not be able to get in deeper positions just because he's sitting in the corner just drilling threes. And I think you see that across the board, but also too, even injuries, when you look at the NBA and you see all the experts too. And, when someone gets hurt and they have all these ideas, I mean, I'm a believer that it's strictly because we're talking about accumulation of work from maybe 4 years old to about 34 years old. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if you spend a lot of time looking at the analytics of everybody saying that, oh, I could have prevented this injury from happening and all this, it's like, all right, guys, let's relax. Come on, like it's an athlete. Like, I never understood how people say, like, could you explain like the method behind telling people that you can prevent an injury?
If that were the case, then, I'd probably make a lot more money and we wouldn't have physical therapists, we wouldn't have athletic training, we would have, limited amount of professionals. But I do think like from the aspect of telling athletes, hey, this can make you more resilient and you might feel a little better. And maybe we do this for 6 straight months, you might jump a little higher, you might run a little faster, and they may be more confident to push through some adversity, say late in the year where maybe there is pain that's kind of inevitable because you're playing 2 games in 3 days and it's your conference tournament. But yeah, I always never want to make those promises to anyone, not even myself.
That's a tough promise to make. But if you look at your early careers when you get into, starting of coaching, what's something that you wish you would have known back then that you kind of had to figure out throughout the way?
I would say that, just being able to understand other people's viewpoint, right? And that could be the athletes, the coaches you work with. Got into this profession at very early. I was 23 when I first got hired here. In my seventh year of Division One basketball, which I'm extremely grateful for. There's about 365 of us in the country, which is an honor for me, especially as a basketball guy. I would say probably just being able to manage adversity and understand that you know interpretation of one bad day doesn't guide the whole program or just the whole week for that matter, right? So I think just being able to understand where the athlete's coming from, how coaches view the weight room, how you can work to build that relationship. I think biggest thing too early in my career, I felt like I struggled with some of our better players who might have been younger, and I think sometimes, I probably approached it as like, hey man, we got to do this way. But in reality, it's like I probably could have got extra work in. I could have did this and that with them if I would have just built that relationship.
And how hard is it to learn as a coach, to build relationships instead of just worrying about, how much knowledge you have, how much you've learned from the book and the CSCS and all this stuff that you have, but getting these athletes to really buy into what you're trying to preach and push forward with comes from just building a relationship and knowing who they are.
No, and it's so important because the reality is you used to have kids for say 4 or 5 years. Now you're talking about 6 months for some individuals that may be coming from playing with their national team. They might be here in August, then they leave by March. So I think that aspect is more important than anything. And, I think the one way I've been trying to do it recently is just being available when I can and trying to utilize some of our technology, utilize my interns who are amazing, by the way. But also too, like giving them a voice at the table of like, hey man, how are you feeling today? What do you think of today's workout? What do you want to work on? And I think that has helped me a lot. But in today's world of college basketball, like that has to be the number one, I think, just because you have so much turnover, even if you have a really good year, even if you have a really bad year. And we've been kind of used to it here at Youngstown. We were kind of like ahead of the curve in that sense. But I think over the years, I've kind of learned what works and what doesn't when building those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the lay of the land of all college sports nowadays, it's just a factory now, right? Like you're
Yeah.
just bringing people in and out, like where you got to get in where you fit in, right? But on top of that, how do you balance out, the work-life balance and learning when to take a step back and say no to things and kind of have your own personal life?
So the beauty of college basketball, I will say it's different from other sports in the sense, one, I don't have a ton of teams. So I have men's golf and men's basketball, which is quite the contrast, but it is fun to work with. So I'm not necessarily that busy compared to, say, other coaches where they have 7 or 8 teams. So my basketball is my most time consuming priority. But I think I do a very good job over the years of when the athletes are not here, if I can get away, I'm going to get away. And when I go home, I'm not working on stuff. I think the past 2 months I've worked on that. Last summer, I'd go home and I'd just be charting stuff. I'd be doing this and that. Now it's like, I'd rather stay an extra 30 minutes at work and then go home and not worry about it. So I think just leaving work stuff at home, but also too, like when you do have windows to get away and really work on your craft or maybe just go see family, like go do that then.
And then for your like interns, how do you preach that to them? Because like when you first started off, right? He's like, Coach, I want to do it all. Like I got to figure out it all right now, and I can't say no to it because I might get passed up if I do that. So how do you like get them to understand it? Like it's okay to take some time away and like have a life.
No, and I think in our profession, we're so rigid and this is how it's always been done. This is how you got to do it. And I think at some point that stuff is good. Don't get me wrong, but I've honestly tried to lead them more in a servant way where they work with other coaches. I only got 15 athletes. Like I'm not going to just make you set stuff up. I want to empower you to use technology. I want to try to have conversations that are more than just, hey, you got to coach them more, right? So I think that stuff has been really helpful for me, just having them, but also too, like I think they enjoy coming in because they know that I'm not more so viewing it as like a free labor deal, which I know internships sometimes that is part of the gig. But I've always tried to push them to, one, try to learn more, two, like view themselves as more than just a weight room person.
Yeah, with that, I mean, because a lot of a lot of coaches that we've had on, have talked about that role of the intern of being unpaid, right, and kind of having multiple jobs and being all over the place and trying to figure out how to make ends meet. Do you feel that's ever going to change, like in the strength conditioning world, that to where interns will get paid or that they should be paid? Because I mean, you also talk about like, hey, this is the rigid game of what we've been in, right? Like it's always been this way. Like you've got to earn your keep. Like you got to work up the totem pole. But is it really necessary?
No, and I agree. And I also think, like, I hope that we can move away from that, especially when we're talking about these bigger universities that have, ridiculous amounts of funding, at least give them gear, give them meals, something. I think that stuff, I don't know if it will change, but I do know there's a lot more graduate assistantships opening up. So at least you can say, hey, man, like you pass your CCS or you pass your um, CS, CCA, you have a great chance of, landing something. I do think that's encouraging at least. And nonetheless, to get out of the profession, you have a master's that will be mostly paid for. I think that's probably where we're leading towards. I follow a lot of the job boards, and it seems like there's endless graduate assistantship positions, which I think those are valuable because you learn what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, because we all go into bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, right, expecting this great cushy lifestyle, right, but not knowing that it's a lot of hours, right, and you don't know what, like, it all seems great when you first walk into it, but you don't know what you're walking into, what the staff is going to be like, what the turnover is going to be like you said, like even for the athletes, like they're coming and going, like it's the same way for a lot of of the bigger programs that are just changing in and out for their staffs. So learning how to get in is a huge thing. But for your athletes, and I think, a lot of athletes love to understand or know this is, would you want to be coached by you?
I think I would, in the sense that I'm pretty transparent, but I don't necessarily. It's not always confrontational. It could be something as simple as just communicating, directly, like, "Hey, fix this," or "Hey, man, you're a minute late. I'm not gonna make a deal out of it, but we got to do this." Just I think in the sense of being transparent and having the similar work ethic to them in terms of, I'm working on my craft just as much as you are, if not more. Just viewing it that way, I would 100% want to be coached by me.
Love it. I love it. What would be your best advice for a coach, fresh coach, getting into this that just got a full-time position? And how did you handle, your first year of dealing with being a full-time coach?
I think I was excited. I think that I brought good energy for the most part, but I do think like understanding that it's not always going to be easy and there's things out of your control. So I think just being consistent through the course of, say, a basketball season, for example, where there's 24 to 28 weeks, you could start 2-5, 2-6, and there's 31 games. And a lot of times at our level, we're playing against, a couple power fours every year to start. So it's not always going to be bad, but just trying to maintain the same energy despite any sort of adversity or negative conflict that may come your way. And I think that's probably my biggest challenge over the years. I think like each year, just trying to be that same person, when December hits, November, and just coaching the same way, having the same energy, maybe not, just crushing them to death, but too, in the same sense, just being transparent and having, constant communication.
If you look back at 23-year-old self and look at your programming and all the exercises you were doing then, what are some things that you look back and think back and like, why was I doing that?
It's funny you say that. I'd probably say, I say this especially because I have taller kids now, and I'd probably say back squatting. I love back squatting myself. It's a great movement. There's plenty of programs that win championships that do it, but I'm just seeing the guys that I have now, and I'm looking at the adaptation and just the learning curve. I probably should have went away with it with at least a couple individuals.
Yeah.
It's probably the easiest one.
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard for some strength coaches to understand that, especially working with basketball people if they're super tall. Why do you want to get away from it, or why should you have gotten away from it early?
I think just in terms of like the movement quality, the body type of athletes that we're working with, I mean, you're talking about super long levers, you're talking about guys that are, super specialized in their sport. And then what I'm getting from both the athlete and the coaches, they just want to get stronger, right? So I think when you're talking about the learning curve and then just knowing who you are as a coach and what can you do to get that the most efficient, safe way, that I think, me getting away from has probably helped a lot, especially when you're talking about even such as lower back issues and even just complaints. If guys like doing it, they're going to get better intent. So I honestly, with having a new team mostly every year, I try to not cater, but get feedback in the sense of what are we going to do to get stronger? You're going to lift 4 plates doing this, or you're going to do 185 with this, you know? So that has helped me a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I can fully understand why you've kind of figured out what fits best for that team and how to
Yes.
help them stay on the court. But how do you measure success? Beyond PRs, scholarships, wins, what would be your definition of success?
Probably, honestly, like it, and I've been here 7 years, so I've had an array of guys come through. I haven't even kept track, but I know we have 20 guys overseas playing, and about 10 of them came back this summer to train, and we probably didn't do it the most intensive session. It definitely wasn't like they're in college, but I think just having those long lasting relationships with a guy who's making money professionally, whether it's for entry level or high level, them still reaching out. I think even like outside of programming and stuff like that, just having those long term relationships shows that you made an impact in some way, versus just putting, 30 pounds on a kid or something.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can agree with that. And I think that's been a common answer across the board for a lot of coaches is having their athletes come back. And also, being invited to weddings and having them reach out about just life situations has been one of the most common things for a lot of our coaches across the board when I ask that. But our last question before we get out of here comes from a coach that we had on before is how have you handled suffering in life? Whether that's going to be with coaching, that's financially, that's personally, whatever it may be, how have you handled it and then found a way to bounce back?
I think the biggest thing is just looking at who's closest to you and how they handle it, right? So having parents, having just friends that manage it every day. I think not even like reaching out directly, but just seeing it like right in front of you has really helped me because it's like, okay, I have all these complaints today, but then one of my athletes is dealing with X, X, Y, and Z, and there's probably other stuff I don't know about, right? So, but they're still coming to work every day. They're still professional. That has kind of really helped me just observing from afar, especially those ones close to me.
So before we get out of here, what's something you would want us to ask our next guest?
It's a good question. I got to think about who you're going to have on here, and what ways do you try to progress as a professional outside of strength conditioning? I think that's something that as you get older, you start thinking about.
And what is it for you?
Me personally, I think right now I'm just trying to find other hobbies and things that I can do outside of just basketball and weightlifting.
What hobbies have you found so far?
I've always went fishing. Now I'm just trying to travel a little more and spend time and just try to save money in the process, but do things that are fun. I think that's one thing. Even going outside more is very underrated, especially when you work in a college weight room where you're just constantly indoors all day.
All the time. Yes, yes, coach.
Literally.
Coach, it's always awesome to get another like-minded coach and get them on and talk about just life. So I appreciate you coming on today and thank you so much for your time. And we're out.
Thanks for having me on here.